Hi, my name's Dave. You're watching Make for Others, and in this episode, we built a birdhouse for my friend Jason. My friend Jason has an upcoming business trip out of town, so it's a perfect time to make some stuff for him. Since he loves practical jokes, I'm making about 100-yard signs with pictures of him and a 5 by 9 foot tall sign of him as a child that's going on his roof. His wife was all for it.
That sounds great, just please don't break the house.
Links to those build videos are down below. But in addition to those practical jokes, I know he loves everything about birds. Watching them, feeding them, identifying their chirps and songs, everything. So I'm gonna build a birdhouse for him that looks like his house. First thing to do is get reference photos of his house from all different sides. The reason I have a basketball with me is because it's an easy reference point for starting measurements. All the photos got put into a program called Adobe Illustrator and then scaled up or down so the basketball is a consistent size from photo to photo, which then means the proportions of the sides of the houses are correct with one another. After tracing the major parts of the sides of the house in Illustrator, they got printed out and then spray mounted on the cardboard so I could create a mock-up of the birdhouse before making the real one. I like cardboard because it's cheap and easy to work with. If you've never done something before, like build a birdhouse, then there's going to be problems to solve, which is part of the fun in my opinion. By starting in cardboard, you can identify some of the problems sooner, and you can cheaply test out different ways to solve them, like where the roof line of the sunroom connects with the rest of the house. That's an interesting angle in a couple of different ways, and it's only going to get more interesting when factoring in the thickness of the final build material, which is 3/4 inch wood. Speaking of the final build material, so let's quickly talk through the specific design choices that were done because of the general suggestions the internet recommended. 3/4 inch pine wood that was free of chemicals or treatments, water-based exterior latex paint on all outside surfaces, galvanized screws to hold it all together, glue that was rated for outdoor use, 1/4 inch holes in all the bottom corners for drainage, holes hidden underneath the roof for ventilation, and starting with a small entrance hole for the birds. Different hole sizes are attractive to different types of birds, so by starting small, we can easily make it bigger depending on what birds Jason wants the birdhouse to be attractive to. All that list will be explained in more detail in the description below, but basically, I wanted to make this birdhouse a good place for birds to live and build it to last a long time. The cardboard mock-up and all the other supplies were taken to my father-in-law's workshop. Having the mock-up there was nice because I could use it for reference and measurements. One of the additional things I did to make the birdhouse last longer was to have all the sides go down to the bottom, and before attaching the floor, I raised it up about 1/4 inch so it wasn't flush with the sides. This was done to slow down damage that rain might do by getting in between the pieces. Now, rain would have to go down the sides, across the bottom, back up a side, and then up into the floor, which isn't impossible, but this should at least slow that down. The other thing I found out was that birds don't like a lot of room in their houses. So the interior of the birdhouse was way too big to be attractive to any potential house hunting birds. As a guy that loves elbow room and leg room, I don't understand this. But since it's for the birds, a divider was put in the middle to split the space in half and be extra support for the roof. Because of making the cardboard mock-up, it wasn't a surprise that making the roof intersection wasn't easy. But because I was able to see that problem coming, there was plenty of time to think through solutions. So instead of trying to make it perfect, I realized it just had to be good enough because I was going to cover it up with other materials. But before we get to that, I had a few other things to do like connecting parts, sanding down rough areas, covering up screw heads, more sanding, some gluing, painting 2 coats of primer, more sanding, 3 more coats of primer, painting 3 coats of the color, and then masking some areas with painter's tape. Now it was time to use roofing paper, which is also known as tar paper or roofing felt. I couldn't find any recommendations for the best way to paper and shingle a birdhouse roof, so I stuck with the general ideas. The biggest roof was started first, and the goal of connecting the 2 roof lines perfectly was accomplished with the paper. The staples are less than 3/4 inches long, so I wasn't worried about them going through the wood and into where the birds would live. The edges of the paper got stapled, so it wouldn't move around when putting on the shingles. Since attaching the shingles was going to be the last step before installing at Jason's house, I measured and masked out areas based on the cardboard mock-up and painted a few coats of the window and door colors. You can see at this point the mock-up has been cut up to help test some of the adjustments that needed to be made and to confirm measurements. Now it was time to add the trim, or what some people call edging. It's the stuff that goes around windows and doors. For this, I used polystyrene, which is a type of plastic. Since this stuff is typically used for architectural models and other projects that stay indoors, I called the manufacturer and told them what I was doing to see if the polystyrene was durable enough for outdoor use. In the end, the only thing I would need to do is spray a few coats of clear UV protective paint so that the polystyrene won't turn yellow after being out in the sun for a while. Since most of the parts were pretty small, I quickly switched over to using tweezers to help put them in place and stop my fingers from being repeatedly glued together. Once I got into a rhythm of measuring, cutting, gluing, and attaching, this step went pretty quick. Now that everything else was done, it was time for the shingles. You could buy small ones that get used on dollhouses, but if you need a bunch, they can be expensive and might not be durable enough for outside use. So I decided to take some regular shingles and turn them into little shingles. After figuring out the sizing, a bunch of strips were cut using a utility knife blade that is specifically made to cut shingles. This blade made it so much easier to cut than expected. I decided not to cut the strips up into individual shingles after realizing it just wasn't necessary. Jason's house has the kind of roof where you don't notice every single shingle. It would also add a bunch of time to cut and attach a few hundred of them, and all the spaces where the shingles would meet would make more places for the water to potentially get in. So I attached the strips and varied their lengths. Metal cutting shears made it really easy to do all the cuts, including the ones that were angled for where the roof lines met. Starting on the part of the roof that was going to be the easiest, I had the strips hang over the bottom and sides a little, like a regular roof, and work my way up. What I didn't get on camera was the making of the chimney. The roof paper got cut away so the chimney could be glued on. And then I finished the shingling. The top shingling had to hang over both sides, so to help it bend and stay that way, some quick dry exterior glue was used. This worked out pretty well, which is good because Jason was getting home from his business trip the next day, so the birdhouse was getting installed that afternoon. So that Jason could pick the permanent location of the birdhouse, I just did a temporary installation. A small hole about a foot deep got made, and then a PVC pipe that was just a little bit bigger than the galvanized pipe was hammered into it. The galvanized pipe flange, and birdhouse bottom got attached, and then the rest of the birdhouse was connected. A few wooden shims were hammered into place between the PVC pipe and the ground to make the whole thing level. The last thing to do was to cover up all the holes to protect the inside, and then spray the exterior with a couple coats of clear UV protective paint. Actually, the very last thing to do was make this house an exact copy of Jason's house. So that meant installing a sign on the top of the sunroof, like his house was about to get. After splitting the inside in half, I realized that something nice looking needed to go on the extra wall. Something the birds would enjoy. Which is why a picture of Jason was stapled on both sides. If he ever wants to make another home available, he just needs to drill an additional hole on the opposite end of the house. Did you see that?
What's on this side?
Other one.
Okay.
In case, so this isn't, it's a built so that if he wants to make another one, then it's in there automatically.
Got it.
Birds don't like huge houses.
You included this so well.
I learned a lot on the internet. There's a lot
That looks so good.
There's a lot of helpful people on the internet when it comes to the rules and regulations of birdhouse building.
He's gonna love that.
That might be the only thing.
Oh my gosh, he was gonna love that.
Oh, and because we're making adjustments